Tonight, a deal for Gaza delayed and 73 Palestinians reportedly killed while the wait for a ceasefire goes on. Among those killed or injured, women and children thought to have been celebrating news of a truce. Israel's Prime Minister hit the brakes on a vote accusing Hamas of backtracking over the terms. Also tonight,
we must and we will stand with Ukraine for as long as is possible. That's why I'm here.
Starmer in Kiev meeting injured Ukrainians and their president. Our political editor Beth Rigby was there and asked how far Britain would go to protect them.
Would you be prepared to deploy troops for peacekeeping? Would you agree to do that in principle?
I've been discussing this with a number of allies, including, of course, President Macron, including President Zelensky here today, and we will play our full part.
And a warning from the Oval Office about an oligarchy threatening to take control. We'll look at how Joe Biden said goodbye to America. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening from Doha. I'm Yalda Hakim. 24 hours ago, we stood here reporting on that historic ceasefire deal for Gaza. We thought it was over the line, but we're not there yet. The drama continued today after Israel's Prime Minister announced the vote to approve the deal would be delayed, accusing Hamas of blackmail and attempting to backtrack on the terms. But tonight, there are reports in Israel that the Security Cabinet will meet tomorrow to hold that vote. And in the last 2 hours, another dramatic development. Far-right Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has threatened to resign if the deal goes ahead. He's accused the Prime Minister of surrendering to Hamas. We'll have to wait and see what implications these divisions within Israel have before Sunday. But the US remains confident a ceasefire will begin. While that wait goes on, Gaza's suffering does too. The health ministry there says that since the deal was announced, 73 people have been killed by dozens of Israeli airstrikes. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi has our first report.
The ceasefire in Gaza cannot come fast enough. The funeral processions are still endless. There's not yet any respite from the falling bombs. This is the body of Abdul Rahman. He was killed as the ceasefire agreement was being announced.
2 people were killed in the house, and afterwards I found out that one of the martyrs was my brother.
It has taken 15 months to get to this point, but the violence will continue until the ceasefire hopefully becomes a reality on Sunday. The impact of the war here has been devastating. Whole towns and villages levelled by bombardment. And more than 45,000 people killed and rising.
We were waiting for the truce and were happy. It was the happiest night since October the 7th. Suddenly, after an hour, we received the news of the martyrdom of 40 people from the Alouche family, including my uncle.
Outside this hospital in Gaza City, they arrange the bodies of the dead as best they can. In this scene of misery, they sit quietly in a state of shock. Almost every family in Gaza has lost loved ones. Osama al-Hajj Ali mourns the loss of his mother.
She was waiting for the ceasefire and to be happy meeting her children coming from the south. Look what they are doing to us in the last days before the ceasefire.
The flow of casualties never seems to stop, and neither does the grief. There were celebrations when the deal was announced, but now, until it becomes a reality, there is fear and uncertainty over whether this will ever end. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Ali Bunkall, who joins me now live from Tel Aviv. And Ali, we'll speak about the devastation in Gaza in a moment that continues. But first of all, some developing news in the last hour where we saw Itamar Ben-Gvir, that far-right minister, come out, give a press conference and threaten to resign if this deal goes ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Itamar Ben-Gvir is considered an extreme politician here in Israel. He's a member of the far right. He leads the Otmach Yehudit party that has 6 seats in the coalition. He regularly threatens to leave the government if he doesn't get his way. The last time he did it was only a couple of weeks ago, when the Israeli government was voting through the latest budget, and his threats meant that Benjamin Netanyahu, who was in hospital having undergone a prostate operation, had to leave his hospital bed, go to the Israeli Knesset and take part in the vote in order to see that deal through before returning to hospital. So threats from Itamar Ben-Gvir are nothing new. Ben-Gvir, despite his threats, knows that his position in government is a rare thing, and if he leaves, he might never return. But he has threatened to leave if that deal is approved. That deal will go to the vote tomorrow, and so we will see whether Ben-Gvir makes good on that threat. What it does show is that Israel is not in a single voice when it comes to the ceasefire agreement on the table.
Israel is divided over the news of a ceasefire deal. Outside the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem, hundreds gathered this morning to protest against it, believing that it represents a surrender to Hamas.
We don't want to do deals with the devil again. We had enough of that. We want to beat this war. We send our soldiers to war, to battle, to win this battle, to destroy Hamas when nothing remains from them.
The fact that we're only receiving in this current deal 33 hostages over the span of 47 days, it just shows that we haven't done enough and that we still have more work to do. Because if we'd really managed to beat Hamas, we might have killed 46,000 Hamas terrorists, but they managed to recruit the same amount and even more.
They have powerful support in the Israeli government. The far-right parties have threatened to leave the coalition if the ceasefire deal is approved.
Some of the protesters here are family members of Israeli soldiers killed fighting in Gaza over the last 15 and a half months. And they believe that the deal struck in Qatar amounts to an Israeli surrender.
The Israeli cabinet should have met today to approve the deal. But Benjamin Netanyahu accused Hamas of demanding last-minute changes. He's also facing a rebellion from some in his own coalition. The National Security Minister has threatened to resign.
With an abandoned agreement approved and implemented, we will deliver our letters of resignation to the Prime Minister, and the Otzma Yehudit will not be part of the government, and we are resigning from it.
The United States is confident the ceasefire will begin on Sunday.
I am confident, and I fully expect that implementation will begin, as we said, on Sunday. Look, it's not exactly surprising that in a process and a negotiation that has been this challenging and this fraught, you may get a loose end. We're tying up that loose end as we speak. I've been on the phone in one way or another all morning with Brett McGurk, with our Qatari friends, and I'm very confident that this is moving forward.
In Tel Aviv tonight, hostage families and their supporters were again on the streets, as they have been every week for 15 and a half months. Yifat Calderon's cousin, Ofer, is one of the hostages. He is 52 years old, and so expected to be released in the first phase.
I just get hope, but I don't have any faith in each side of not in our side and not in the other, and Hamas. We got to finish this war. We got to bring them all back, because if we're going to wait more and more, we'll not have anybody, any hostages to bring home.
These are nervous days in Israel and Gaza. The ceasefire agreement has already proved itself to be fragile. Despite the mediator's optimism, few here think it will hold for long. Ali Bunkall, Sky News in Israel.
And Ali's still with us. Ali, and you really get a sense of the divisions in Israel, the divisions within the government. And of course, for the Palestinians as well, a deadly wait, frankly, just in the last 24 hours. We've seen dozens of people killed as those airstrikes continue.
Yeah, I mean, these hours, I mean, let's assume that when the Israeli cabinet meets tomorrow, they do approve the deal. And I should say that even if Itamar Ben-Gvir were to withdraw his party from Israel's governing coalition, it would not be enough to bring down the government here. But let's assume the Israeli cabinet does approve the deal and it is going to be set for Sunday. You know, it's going to be a very long couple of days for the people in Gaza and for many here in Israel who have been wanting this deal for so many months. They are waiting to see whether it sticks. As you saw in my report, many believe that even if it gets past the first hurdle on Sunday, it might not last beyond the first phase. But, you know, this has been negotiated for many, many months. This is a comprehensive deal. It is a complicated deal. And, you know, we will see whether Hamas and Israel can stick to it. Benjamin Netanyahu has shown in the past that he has been influenced by the far right in his coalition. Well, will he be influenced again? The far right want to see the war in Gaza resume. Will Benjamin Netanyahu give them what they want, or will he give the people behind me here in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv what they want? And that is an end to the war and a return of the hostages.
Yeah, absolutely, Ali. As you say, big questions that remain as we wait to see what happens over the coming days. Well, as Ali was saying there, we are expecting the Israeli cabinet to meet tomorrow, and then hopefully, if all goes well, this ceasefire will come into effect on Sunday, and then from that point onwards, we will see some hostages being released. Well, Hamas claims one of the 50 IDF airstrikes launched today hit an area near to where a female Israeli hostage was held. It's just another reminder, as if we needed one, of the peril those being held in Gaza remain in, and of course for all of those Palestinians as well. Among those still being held is Doron Steinbrecher, a 31-year-old veterinary nurse who was taken from her apartment in Kibbutz Kfar Aza. Well, joining me now is Michael Mayo, Doron's cousin. Thank you, Michael, for joining us here on the program. We can see and you know, we've spoken to hostage families, the anxious wait, the pain of the last 15 months, and reports coming out from Hamas today that those airstrikes were hit where one of the IDF soldiers was. These are difficult days.
So difficult. We are on an emotional roller coaster as families since for the last 468 days. Yeah, we are very much worried about my cousin Doron. What's her situation? Is she alive or not? We heard, the last thing we heard about her was almost a year ago, where Hamas released a video. We could see that she's not in a good situation. She looked pale, she looked thin. We know for sure that she's not getting, she suffers from a chronic disease. She needs her medication daily. You could see that she's not getting them. We are very much worried, as you said. It's a horrible situation for us now as families.
Yeah. Yeah, and we are hearing about leaked lists that are coming out. Do you know if Doron is on that first list? Are you expecting her to be released in the initial phase?
To be honest, we haven't heard anything yet. We get our updates. We are relying on the media for information. We know nothing. We're worried, and we're very cautious with this deal. We know the last year taught us that anything can go wrong at any moment. It's very fragile, as you said a few minutes ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And just tell us, Michael, what are you hoping to say to Doron when you hopefully see her?
That we tried to stay strong. We did everything we could to speak for her. We miss her. We hope she'll survive. We hope she survived. And we are here for her.
Mikhail, over the course of the last 15 months or so, whenever we've spoken to hostage families, they've talked about the shared and collective pain that the hostage families community have had. And they've also talked about how closely knit they've become in this process.
Absolutely. Look, we call for the return of all 98 hostages. Bring them home. Those who have died deserve a proper burial here in Israel, and those who are alive need to be brought back to heal and recover with their families. Unfortunately, those circumstances made us all one big family and under a terrible title, the hostages families. We know everyone, and we definitely call for the return of all 98 hostages. It's been too long. They need to be back.
Well, Mikhail, we're really grateful you've joined us here on the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as we saw in Alistair's report, the outgoing US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he's confident a ceasefire will be enforced on Sunday despite the delay. He gave his last State Department news briefing today as the clock ticks down on the administration that he's spent 4 years representing around the world. Well, let's go straight to our correspondent David Blevins, who joins us from Washington. And David, we've heard Joe Biden, the president, give a number of briefings over the course of the last few days. We've heard from Antony Blinken. This one was particularly difficult for the outgoing Secretary of State.
Yes, Yalda, it has been an eventful 4 years for Antony Blinken, and it was an eventful final press conference for the US Secretary of State, dominated, as you would expect, by questions surrounding the deal that's just been struck in the Middle East in relation to the setback, the fact that the Israeli cabinet has not yet ratified it. He described that as a loose end, but was hopeful the loose end would be tied up, allowing things to be implemented and the ceasefire to come into effect by Sunday. But tension is running high, as always, around these issues, and he was repeatedly interrupted during that press conference, with one journalist even having to be physically removed from the room at the State Department for repeatedly demanding that the Secretary of State answer his questions before he'd even finished making his initial statement. Let's just have a look at what happened.
Please, sir, respect the process. Thank you.
Oh, respect the process. Respect this process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International, to the ICJ saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague?
Well, as we saw there, David, quite dramatic moment there as the journalist was physically removed. And then, as you say, a little later, another journalist called out to the Secretary of State as well. And he did reiterate that he would answer any questions, but that he wanted them to wait till the end of the briefing. But as you say, so much anger, especially around this issue, not just criticism of how Israel has prosecuted this war, but just how the United States has handled its relationship with Israel over the course of the last 15 months since October the 7th.
Yes, and I suppose that anger and that tension, Yalda, stands in stark contrast to what we've seen over the last 24 hours here in Washington. Some surprise, perhaps, at the unprecedented level of cooperation there has been between the outgoing administration led by President Biden and the incoming administration led by President-elect Donald Trump. We know, for example, that Joe Biden's Middle East envoy has been in the region for months now trying to get this deal done. In more recent days, though, he's been joined by Donald Trump's Middle East envoy. For a period of time, they divvied up critical meetings between them to maximum effect. And I think I'm hearing that the roots to that unprecedented cooperation began when Joe Biden and Donald Trump met for their fireside chat in the Oval Office immediately after Trump's election victory, when both recognised it was in their interest to get this done now. Yesterday, President Biden described it as the most difficult negotiation in his 50 years of elected politics. And he talked about them speaking with one voice to ensure they brought an end to the struggle in Gaza and brought about the right resolution, as he described it, for the hostages from Israel.
Yeah, the Qatari Prime Minister, when I put that same question to him, said that this deal transcended both administrations, both the Biden and the incoming Trump administration, and thanked both of their envoys. They were in the room here in Doha. David, thank you very much for bringing us up to date. Well, the big question then is, how big a factor was Donald Trump in securing the Gaza ceasefire? Richard Engel and I delve into that and all the key factors of the deal in the latest episode of The World podcast. The QR code is on your screen now, so you can listen to it there. There are a lot of moving parts to this story, which is why the new episode is a little later than usual. Let's just have a look. What I heard from diplomats here in the region, from the Arab world, they're incredibly impressed by the way that the Trump officials have conducted themselves. They said that the envoy put the kind of pressure that was needed, frankly, over the course of the last 14 months.
Let's not forget the idea that he had put out saying, if this isn't passed by the time I'm in office, all hell is going to break loose. It's going to be terrible consequences. So you think that really changed the dynamic?
At the end of the day, Trump is a deal maker, and he wanted a deal. He wanted a deal, just as he'd said before inauguration. He also has an ability to be able to instill fear because he's so uncertain, he's so unpredictable. And so I think those are some of the reasons why the deal got over the line. You can listen to the rest of our podcast, The World, with Richard Engel and myself, and the QR code is still on your screen. You can also get it wherever you get your podcasts. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Lots more coming up on the programme. We're with you for 100 years. The British Prime Minister's pledge in Ukraine to help guarantee the country's security. Stay with us for that.
What's it like doing this kind of stuff when he's not here?
Yeah, I miss him. He just inspired me to be a better person. He's shown us what living looks like in the toughest and most difficult of circumstances.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. It isn't what politicians see from election battle buses, but what ordinary people see from the buses that shape the timetable of their lives.
I feel like there's no trust between the people and the politicians.
Labour's going to get in definitely, and they're no better than the Conservatives.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Cartels in Mexico are flooding America with the drug. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Sky News, the full story first. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
A very good morning to you all.
Morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. Brianna's dad told Sky News what he thinks of them.
If I'm honest, I hate them. They're just evil. They'll always be monsters.
Free wherever you get your news. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
God forbid we should have to do this again.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Welcome back. Let's turn away from events here in the Middle East to the conflict in Ukraine. Today, the Prime Minister was in Kiev to meet with President Zelensky, but in doing so was met with a message from Moscow. While Sir Keir Starmer was at the presidential palace, a Russian drone had to be shot down from the skies above. Afterwards, our political editor Beth Rigby spoke to the Prime Minister in a broadcast exclusive about how far Britain might go to protect Ukraine. A key question, could UK troops ever be deployed there as part of a peacekeeping force? A warning, her report includes pictures of Ukrainian burns victims.
How long ago was the injury?
The Prime Minister face to face with the human cost of the war in Ukraine.
He was protecting our motherland. Yeah.
Visiting Kyiv for the first time since taking office, meeting patients at the country's main burns hospital. NHS doctors have helped to train the staff here. Their work is slow, painful and vital. This is why visits like this really matter. The Prime Minister today seeing people coming in from the war zones with 80% burns. A really, really horrific reminder of the real pain and suffering of the Ukrainian people. A visit designed to give one clear message: solidarity. Shoulder to shoulder with President Zelensky, laying a wreath at the wall of remembrance for Ukraine's fallen men. There is diplomatic substance along with the symbolism. The two leaders signing a landmark 100-year deal to deepen security ties and strengthen their country's relationship into the next century. The urgency underscored by a Russian drone hovering over the presidential palace while the two men spoke. Air raid sirens sounding moments before the start of the joint press conference.
For me, that drone attack is just really a reminder of what Ukraine is facing every day, and a reminder that this war is brought about by Russian aggression. It is an unjust, illegal war, and we must have a sustainable and lasting peace for Ukraine.
Anti-aircraft gunfire was audible in the palace's courtyard, the president undeterred.
Mr. President, we will say hello to them as well.
The PM announced extra air defence support for Ukraine, but on the matter of President Zelensky's long-stated desire for NATO membership, the frustration clear.
The US, Slovakia, Hungary and Germany were honest that they did not want to see us in NATO. It's an open conversation and there are no secrets about this. These are the four countries. They all have their reasons, but they have not seen Ukraine in NATO yet.
This is a visit filled with the symbolism of a leader determined to stand in solidarity with Ukraine. But when it comes to the substance, everything could be about to change as Donald Trump sweeps to power, determined to end this war at the negotiating table rather than on the battlefield. The imminent shift in Washington has focused the mind of Ukraine's allies. Would you be prepared to deploy troops for peacekeeping? This is an open discussion amongst allies. Macron's talking about it. You met him last week. Just in principle, would you agree to do that?
Well,
in principle,
I've been discussing this with a number of allies, including, of course, President Macron, including President Zelensky here today, and we will play our full part. We have always been one of the leading countries in relation to the defence of Ukraine, and so you can read into that that we will be playing our full part.
And what would you say to British people that might be listening to this viewers back home that think, we don't want to get dragged into this, we don't want our troops to get dragged into any peacekeeping, we don't want to get dragged into any sort of more direct conflict or engagement with Russia? What would you say?
Well, I understand that. We are, of course, fully committed to NATO, and we're already deploying troops on a number of frontiers, as you know. And we're doing that because that impacts on our safety and security. And so for me, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the number one priority is the safety and security of everybody in the United Kingdom. But that safety and security starts on this front line here in Ukraine.
These the tools of war, but now the talk is all about how to end the conflict. As the Prime Minister signals, he's prepared to put British boots on the ground to maintain the peace deal that the changing world order now demands. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Kyiv.
Let's go straight to our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who joins us from Kyiv tonight as well. And Deborah, this issue of troops on the ground often comes up. We've heard President Emmanuel Macron, the French president, talk about it in the past. It's also something that Beth has put to the Prime Minister. We know through NATO that NATO forces do provide training and assistance to Ukrainian forces, but this would be going that sort of further mile. They would be steps that these countries would be taking it further ahead.
Well, yes, it would be NATO troops on the ground inside Ukraine, which isn't something new. Before this full-scale invasion, you'll of course remember the US, the UK and others had training missions inside this country following Russia's first invasion of Ukraine back in 2014. They moved out of the country once it became a full-scale war. But there has been talk for a long time now about the potential for, on the one hand, British, maybe French, other troops coming into Ukraine as the war is still going on and providing training here in the country, because it's more efficient to train troops here rather than fly them to the UK and to other countries to do the training and bring them back. But what Beth was talking about with the Prime Minister is this other idea that is also being discussed behind the scenes about the day after, what happens after some kind of deal, if that is going to be able to be struck between the warring sides, to give Ukraine the security guarantees that it needs to be confident that if it allows some kind of freeze to this conflict to happen and some of its land to remain under Russian control, that Russia wouldn't just then regroup, rebuild and re-attack, but would have some actual credible buffer that would deter that kind of aggression in the future.
And Deborah, just give us a sense of the situation on the ground in Ukraine at the moment.
Well, we spent the last couple of days down in the Donbass, which is where the fiercest fighting is going on right now, with Russian forces continuing to push people forward, even though many of them are being killed and wounded by Ukrainian firepower, inching forward, trying to gain as much ground as they can before whatever is going to happen once Donald Trump comes to the White House starts to take place. The Ukrainians too, though, are also wanting to make sure that they are in as strong a position as possible. We've heard over the last couple of days about Ukrainian mass strikes into Russia with drones, with also British missiles, American missiles, and there are Ukrainian forces still on the ground in Kursk, inside Russia, Russian and North Korean troops trying to push them out. They have lost a lot of ground, but they are still there, and clearly that would be a valuable bargaining chip for Ukraine if it finds itself at the negotiating table with Russia.
Yeah, indeed. Deborah, thanks so much for all of your reporting there. Well, this is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, specialist analysis from Sky's data and forensics team on how the war has destroyed much of Gaza.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
President for a second time.
That reason being to save our country, he said.
A remarkable moment, isn't it?
Another chance, another 4 years. The question is, what does he do with those 4 years?
Watch the inauguration of Donald Trump as he becomes president for the second time.
So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
The full story, first on Sky News.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Welcome back to Doha, and we're still waiting to see if a vote on that Gaza ceasefire deal announced here in Qatar just over 24 hours ago will take place tomorrow. And while we do, people are asking questions about the future. Who will govern Gaza and what's left of Gaza to govern? Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has been reviewing the scale of destruction after 15 months of war. Have a look.
We are at the very earliest stages of a ceasefire. It's not the end of the war, it's not a lasting peace, but it is the best opportunity since the start of this conflict, which began with Hamas's attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, and which has left Gaza in total ruin. Now, here's how it may or may not work. As part of the agreement, Israel has agreed to withdraw troops, what it calls the buffer zone, along the full length of its border with Gaza, but not here on the border with Egypt. But when they do pull out, well, what the Israeli military is leaving behind is, frankly, a wasteland. After more than a year of fighting, this is the picture of the damage in red. Around 60% of all the buildings in Gaza have been damaged. And this isn't just an estimate, it's based on satellite radar data. So when buildings have been damaged or topple, that radar from above reflects back to the satellite differently. So this is the damage that is actually detectable from space. But the situation for the homes that people might hope to return to is even worse. 93% of those have been damaged or destroyed. Now, to give you some idea of the change, we can look at satellite imagery. This is northern Gaza, in an area called Beit Lahir, from October 2023. Now, over a year later, you can see this area has been completely destroyed. A green neighbourhood turned to sand and rubble. Most people from across Gaza have gathered in what Israel has termed a humanitarian zone in an area on the coast called Al-Mawasi here. Now, this image of the area from October 23 shows an expansive, sandy coastline dotted with agricultural areas. But on the 3rd of January, this satellite image taken shows the entire area covered in tents where people have been displaced and they're living in dire conditions. In total, you get 1 million people over here living in this orange zone. It's a narrow strip, 7 miles long, less than a mile wide. Getting aid to those people is crucial. Naturally, it's one of the immediate ceasefire steps. Now, this chart shows the amount of aid the Strip has received throughout the year. You can see here in blue the number of trucks that have been arriving each day. And the deal requires a sharp increase here in green in the amount of aid entering the Strip. It needs 600 truckloads of humanitarian aid each day. And you can see how far off that is what we've had so far throughout this conflict. All of that is still conditional. The ceasefire is not yet in place. It may not hold, different stages of it may slip. And that means the even bigger long-term questions, how Gaza will rebuild, who will rebuild it, have no answer.
Big questions there. That was our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire there. Well, let's bring in Tirana Hassan. She's the Executive Director of Human Rights Watch. Tirana, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. It is a nervous wait for the people of Gaza, for the hostage families, as they wait and see what happens between now and Sunday. And of course, beyond that point, because this deal is incredibly complicated and it has multiple phases. But just in terms of the day after, a phrase that has been coined when discussing what will happen to Gaza, who will govern it, and of course the rebuilding process. And when we look at these satellite images of Gaza, it's devastating that virtually all of the Strip has been flattened.
Hi, Yalda. Thank you for having me. Look, I think that you raise a really important point. The level of destruction is not just only about people's homes. There is also, throughout this 15-month conflict, the fact that the Israeli authorities have targeted a lot of civilian infrastructure inside Gaza. So we know that the health system, for example, is decimated. We did a report at the end of last year which showed that the water infrastructure had been targeted and pretty much destroyed, severely limiting the Gazan population of water. So what needs to happen, even if there is a ceasefire, is there has to be full unfettered access to humanitarian assistance and the resources. And we know that this has been a real problem in the past. For the 18 years that Gaza has been shut off, the Israeli authorities have really limited the types of goods that could go in and out. And, the life-saving assistance during this conflict has been limited, but even prior to that, it wasn't what was necessary. So there must be full unfettered access to all of the resources, to rebuild the infrastructure, to provide the life-saving assistance, to rebuild the health structure, and because that is actually what is human survival. That is what the survival of the residents of Gaza is going to turn on.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, I mean, the proposals we're seeing at the moment about the number of trucks that need to get in, 600 or so trucks a day with aid, is one thing, and it feels very much short-term solution. The idea of rebuilding all of that civilian infrastructure that you talk about, I mean, we've spoken over the course of the last 15 months to so many doctors who have visited Gaza and worked in Gaza and have talked about the fact that, you know, they've had to perform all sorts of life-saving injuries without the basic tools that they've needed. And all of those things, including the education system, for example, the health system, as you've just mentioned, and the basics such as water, do need to be rebuilt from scratch.
That's right. I mean, look, through this war, we have seen that, you know, the Israeli military has continued to kill, wound, starve, deliberately deprive Palestinians in Gaza of just the amount of water required for human survival. They've displaced majority of Palestinian population, you know, bombed schools that have turned into shelters, the hospitals, etc. And this is really, you know, what Human Rights Watch has described these as crimes against humanity, the crime against humanity of extermination, of forced displacement, and collective punishment. But when we're talking about, you know, these are must-haves, but also when we talk about the moving on from the ceasefire, all of the hostages will need to be released. And that is an obligation on the Palestinian armed groups. And on top of that, you know, we cannot move on from this point in time without ensuring that there is going to be accountability for all of the crimes that have been committed. This is not some sort of moment where we can rewrite history. From our 50 years of doing this work in conflicts around the world, we know that the abuses of the past must be addressed. And there are procedures before the International Criminal Court, for example, to hold perpetrators to account, including Benjamin Netanyahu and the former defense minister. And obviously there was also the arrest warrant that has been issued for the head of Hamas's military wing. Now, you know, accountability for these crimes is important, but also accountability is just as important for the, you know, systematic oppression that is taking place before this war.
Tirana, I have about a minute left on the interview, but I just want to push you on that point of accountability, because obviously Israel denies, you know, the claims that the accusations you're making of war crimes. And we've also had Western leaders come out, namely the United States, and dismiss these calls of these arrest warrants. What would you say to that?
Well, the US has never was a state party, is not a state party, the International Criminal Court, and it's not the first time that the US has attacked the International Criminal Court or had it caught in its crosshairs. This started with the Bush administration. The arrest, enough evidence has been put forward in by the prosecutor for the arrest warrants to be issued, and now it is for the court to adjudicate exactly the questions that are being contested. Are the perpetrators or alleged perpetrators guilty of these crimes? It is for the court to determine.
Tirana, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Thanks for having me.
Well, there was relief across this region when the ceasefire deal was announced, but the day after, uncertainty and apprehension has crept back in. Today, our international correspondent sat down with the Prime Minister of Iraq to discuss hopes for peace and what impact President-elect Trump might have on the Middle East. Have a look.
As uncertainty sweeps through the Middle East, the Iraqi Prime Minister has been focused on development, travelling to London to negotiate a series of deals. But it's the ceasefire deal in Gaza that dominates thinking here. Mohammed Shia Asadani seems a frustrated man.
There are still disagreements. There are still misunderstandings between the two sides. I wonder how you feel personally. Are you relieved that we have got to this point? Do you feel apprehensive or fearful that a deal may never be done.
The decision to stop the war is not just up to the Israelis. There are other factors that play a part, like the international community. Iraq has been seeking international partners to stop this destructive war, which Netanyahu has been trying to lengthen for various reasons, including internal political reasons that interest him, one of which is to embroil the region in all-out war to give him more time in office.
Much of the wording in the ceasefire agreement that has been released is vague. Will it last? Will this deal last?
It's now more than 16 months. That is enough. It is time for the international community to take action. It's failed to carry out its responsibilities in regards to the grave violations of the rules of war in Gaza. Everyone realizes that this war, this genocidal war, must stop, and that efforts should be made regionally and internationally to reconstruct Gaza.
You say genocide, but those aren't the sort of words that Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, uses, and you've been meeting with him this week. Are you frustrated by the approach, the attitude displayed by leaders in the West to the war in Gaza?
Certainly. It's not only me, but it's everyone who is frustrated with the international community. The failure to recognize the rules of war, international law, humanitarian law, principles of human rights, ideals which everyone say they are fighting for, but they have not. All of these things are thrown against the wall.
Is this something that came up in your discussions with the British Prime Minister?
Yes, this is one of the issues we talked about in our meeting. We have mentioned it. From my side, at least.
Have you met Donald Trump? Have you met him personally?
There was a phone call to congratulate him because he won the presidential election. It was a positive call. We both expressed our desire to cooperate.
Do you think that his arrival on the international scene, his re-arrival on the international scene, offers you an opportunity, or is it an invitation for greater unpredictability in the Middle East?
During his first term, Trump ordered the killing of Qasem Soleimani, a key leader of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, on the streets of Baghdad.
This is the choice of the American people. We have to respect their choice. Our relations with the US are based on institutions. They are governed by questions of strategy.
You're in a difficult position, I think, because there are many groups in Iraq who are part of the Iraqi security forces that are dedicated to fighting and defeating the state of Israel.
We're not embarrassed in any way. We carry out our duties to enforce the law, to maintain security and stability in Iraq, and reject all means of violence. We won't allow any side to dictate the decision between peace and war.
You feel like you're in control of the security situation in Iraq?
No. Yes, certainly.
That was the Iraqi Prime Minister speaking to our John Sparks. Well, next, should we be concerned about the balance of power in the United States? Last night, President Biden used his farewell speech to warn of an American oligarchy emerging. Mark Stone has this analysis.
As the sun set on the Biden White House, this was his farewell moment, an address to the nation, the final one.
My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from the Oval Office.
And if expectations were that he would use it to list his achievements with the bitterness of a man who lost, well, then expectations were wrong. It was instead a siren song farewell.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern.
And words he perhaps hopes will echo long after he's gone.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Far from being a greatest hits farewell, it was instead an extension of his Trump is a threat to democracy argument.
Take over, Elijah, take over.
And that threat is here, the man he did not name, who represents, he said, a dangerous concentration of power.
I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech-industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit.
President Biden knows that no one writes their own legacy. It's for others to do that. And so his message seemed to be wait and see. That in time, beyond his time, these predictions and his own achievements will be recognised, and that would be his legacy.
You know, it will take time to feel the full impact of all we've done together. But the seeds are planted, and they'll grow and they'll bloom for decades to come.
Right now, he is the president who precipitated the return of Donald Trump. He is the faltering figure whose hubris prevented him from stepping down before it was too late. He is the foreign policy president who couldn't control a chaotic world. But legacy isn't set in the moment. It is cemented long after. And to a great extent, that legacy will depend on what happens in here over the next 4 years. Mark Stone, Sky News, at the White House.
Well, with Donald Trump's inauguration on Monday, we're launching a new podcast series called Trump 100. Our US correspondents Martha Kellner, Mark Stone, whose analysis you just saw, and James Matthews will track the incoming president's first 100 days in office. And you can scan the QR code on your screen now to find out more. And of course, we will have all the latest developments from the inauguration on Monday. I will be there with the rest of the team. Well, that's all for tonight's show here from Doha. I'll be back in the next few minutes with all the coverage here from the Middle East in the news at 10. Good night for now from the world.